If you take the things we use every day and magnify them many times under a microscope, the result will amaze and even shock you. In this video, I will show 37 familiar things magnified under a microscope. At first glance, you might think it's the slimy mouth of some creature, but that's what an ordinary banana looks like under a microscope. Those huge hooks can be intimidating and terrifying, but look closely at the Velcro on your clothes, bags, and other things. Under a microscope, you can see how the hooks cling to the lint and thus fasten our jacket or bag. If you think this is an insect magnified under a microscope, I will surprise you greatly. It's just the foot of a housefly. Give this video a like if you thought it was an animal, too. At first glance, you might think it's some multicolored powder magnified 100 times, but in fact, everyone has tried it. This is what a drop of orange juice looks like, magnified under a microscope. Now drinking orange juice is going to be a lot more fun. This is not an enlarged rose flower, as you might think at first. It is a tiny little pore on your skin from which sweat is secreted. There are a million of them on our body. If you find ordinary dust in your home right now and examine it under a microscope, you will see such a colorful picture, microscopic particles of all kinds of things. It looks beautiful. Many of you probably haven't had snow yet, but you can already see what snowflakes look like, magnified hundreds of times. There are billions of these little crystals in the snowballs you throw outside. At first you might think that a similar picture could be found on the surface of Mars, but you might be drinking it right now. This is what instant coffee pellets look like under a microscope. At first it may seem like a regular weed, but they are right on your body. This is a highly enlarged image of your eyelashes. I'm sure you've blinked a few times now in surprise. Looking at this picture, you can unmistakably see that the paper is made of wood. Moreover, it is magnified under a microscope toilet paper. This is not a cut-off tree trunk, this is what a pencil lead looks like when enlarged. If you shoot the process of writing on paper in this magnification, it will look like a disaster movie. You can take these stones and sprinkle them on your food right now. This is what salt and pepper look like when enlarged. At first I thought it was some kind of macaroni, but it turned out to be the lint of a toothbrush under a microscope. Now I understand how a toothbrush cleans even the hard-to-reach places between my teeth. It looks like a landscape in some desert, but it's a magnified photo of a vinyl record. It turns out that the little grooves on the record are not so smooth. I will say at once that this is the skin of a spider under a microscope. It doesn't look as horrible as many spiders. Even if your shirt is not torn, it still has small holes between the fibers. This is clearly visible under a microscope. I don't know about you, but it always shocked me how mosquitoes bite us, because their sting, at first glance, is quite thick. But when you look at the sting of a mosquito under a microscope, everything becomes clear. It's as sharp at the end as the needle of a syringe. One would hardly think that this is the surface of a human tongue under a microscope. It's just unbelievable. Now I understand why it's a little rough. At first glance, you might think that someone chopped the wood into pieces, but that's actually what the hairs on the blade after shaving look like if you magnify them repeatedly under a microscope. Everyone knows that Coca-Cola is dark brown, but I'll surprise you by saying that Coca-Cola is colored. This cola drop under the microscope is incredible. Like this video if you're surprised too. Butterflies are very beautiful even without magnification. But if you look at a butterfly's wing under a microscope, it turns into a real, vivid picture. Look closely at your finger. If you take it and magnify it under a microscope, the pattern on your skin looks exactly like the many islands on the water. At first glance it looks like some kind of monsters, but it is not. This is what the suction cups on a squid's body look like when enlarged. Pretty intimidating. Everyone has tasted a poppy seed bun at least once. The poppy seed is very small. It's hard to believe, but if you cut a kernel open and put it under a microscope, you can see this picture. This is nothing more than the surface of a strawberry magnified 100 times under a microscope. You have to admit, it doesn't look very appetizing. Soap bubbles are beautiful and completely transparent, but if you take a soap bubble and put it under a microscope, you will see such a colorful picture. Let me guess, you floss often, but there's nothing left on it. What do you think the point of flossing is? But if you look at floss under a microscope, you can see the little bits of plaque and nastiness it removes. If you're not already subscribed to our channel, be sure to click the red subscribe button and the bell next to it. That way you'll always be aware of new and interesting videos on our channel. As you know, human hair is about 20 times thicker than a spider's web, and this is not surprising. Even if you enlarge a spider's web several hundred times, it still would not look thick. Although sharks are fish, at first glance it is difficult to see their scales. But if you look at a shark under a microscope, you can see the fine scales. An ordinary eggshell, when magnified several hundred times, looks like this. The thread going through the eye of the needle looks like this if you magnify the image many times over. At first it may look like ice or snow under a microscope, but it's actually something everyone has in their kitchen: sea salt. To look into the eyes of a spider in normal life is quite problematic. They are quite small, and many of us are afraid of them. But now you know exactly what a spider's face looks like under a microscope. You might think this is what a leaf, tree, snakeskin, or apple jelly looks like, magnified many times over, but it's actually an image of a cucumber under a microscope. Looking at this image, it's hard to even guess what was magnified under the microscope. It could be fish scales, tissue, or hair, but it is actually a butterfly wing. And these are fish scales under the microscope, although you must agree that they look very similar to the skin of a human finger or a slice of wood. The hair on a person's head seems very thin and fragile when you look at it without magnification, but under a microscope it looks incredibly impressive. This is what the fine hairs on a person's arms look like, very different from the hair on the head. Be sure to write in the comments what struck you most. Also, subscribe to the channel, click on the bell to be always up to date with new videos and, of course, leave your comments under this video.